All right, so this one's actually from a little while ago. We had a challenge in January around meeting strangers. It was a difficult challenge, and here's one of the struggles that one of our members had. So he says, I'm having a hard time with the challenge. Saying hi to random people is no problem, but actually having a real conversation with strangers is really hard. I keep going to social events alone, hyping myself up to socialize and meet new people, but I just can't get over the hurdle, end up beating myself up over it the entire evening and the day after. He goes on to say, I was bullied a lot when I was young. They always told me I didn't belong. I think that's still a voice in my head. You don't belong in this person's space, you'll only be a nuisance. Maybe it'd be good to try and break it into smaller challenges, but I can't really figure out the right steps. What kind of advice or tips do you guys have? So this is a pretty common one. The idea of being an inconvenience, being inappropriate, worrying that you're going to somehow hurt or upset people just by trying to talk to them. Mike, you want to have first crack at this one?
Absolutely. I think this was one of the 30-day challenges that I ran, and it's one of my favorites, actually. Those of you who know a bit about my history know that I had a lot of social anxiety growing up, and it's something that I only began really effectively tackling head on within the last 10 years. And I can absolutely relate to what he's talking about here in terms of that inner voice that creates all kinds of anxiety and self-doubt, the not good enough story. I like to call it the inner bully because it's relentless and it just seems to want to trash you and give you all of the evidence it can that you're going to fail in this situation. Now, in this particular scenario, there are several different things we could break it into. So like I can think of at least 6 or 7 different areas we could spend hours on each of them. There are a couple, though, that really surface in his question specifically. One is how to deal with that inner bully and how to move forward effectively in conversation practice. And the other, I think, was specific to his challenges with conversation. As he said, he's comfortable saying hi to people, very lightweight things, probably okay, saying hello to a barista or having a sales transaction. But when conversations happen, things tend to go off the rails. I think I'm going to start with that one because there's a very stark realization I had to face in my own self-development regarding social anxiety, and that was that when you get stressed, when you let your thoughts get out of control, when you start trying to predict what's going to happen in the conversation, when you get attached to the outcome, all of these things generate stress, which means cortisol, which means you feel sweaty palms, you feel anxious, you feel pretty terrible, really, completely shit. And aside from making it harder on yourself unnecessarily, there is a huge side effect of this that we don't often talk about, which is cortisol is designed to keep you alive. It's a function of your reptilian brain. So when your reptilian brain thinks your life is in danger, it thinks there's some kind of threat. It can't identify exactly what it is, but you are sweating and panicking. Something seems terribly threatening here. It shuts down your ability to think. It shuts down your frontal lobe because your frontal lobe is very, very slow. And this was how we developed as humans. Your ability to think rationally is awesome. Your ability to have deep conversations is awesome. Your ability to sit on a hilltop and imagine going to the moon is awesome. But it's not great when your brain's trying to keep you alive from an immediate threat that's right in front of you. So that whole part of your brain gets axed. And if you want to know why it's so hard to have conversations when you're feeling stressed, that's why. So for me, I really needed to address that stress first. There was no way for me to develop conversational skills or ease of conversation or even begin tackling the letting go of outcomes, and how do I just say one word and then let her respond. And I was way too anxious. I needed to deal with that anxiety first. And what I'd suggest is that for any of you that find conversations difficult, step back and look at the sources of stress that you're experiencing. Your goal is to minimize those. And I'll get into a little bit of detail on that later, but I'd like to check in with you, Bud, and see what your thoughts on this are.
Yeah, well, carrying on in the same line of thinking is there's a kind of broader topic that I think where most people struggle with socializing is simply because they're not enjoying it. In other words, they're stressed and they're anxious. And they'll often find that if they're hanging out with friends or family or people they feel comfortable with, they're fine with conversation. This isn't a skill set problem. They know what to say and how to say it. They don't even need to think. They just naturally converse. But when they get into certain situations, the frame changes. This goes from fun socializing to hard work, challenge, mission, threat, difficulty. So somehow, and this guy's identified possible triggers from childhood bullying and things like that. And a lot of people have similar backstory. When he goes into socializing, he's going to war. He's not going to have fun and meet people and connect. He's going to try and survive a high threat situation. Every time he backs out of that, he actually confirms it. This is how things like agoraphobia work. Fear of leaving your house is your brain will perceive anything you run away from as dangerous, even if it's not. It takes you running away as evidence of danger. So if you go to a social situation and then you leave before talking to anyone because you're too scared to, your brain will register that as evidence that people are dangerous to talk to. So you're actually making it worse. So one of the key elements, there is a bit of a push here required where if nothing else, you need to make sure you leave the situation with confirmation that nothing dangerous or bad happened. One of the ways of doing that is just because you can't talk doesn't mean leave the situation. It's important that by the time you go home at the end of the night, you register clearly, look, nothing bad happened, even though I didn't talk to anybody. Even if you sit in the corner nursing the same beer for an hour and then go, okay, that's enough, I'll go home now, rather than running away. Because the running away compounds the effect. What I also get from this is that the stress is self-generated. This guy's, like most guys, I think, put a lot of pressure on himself to succeed, a lot of pressure on himself to do well, to have a good conversation. And that pressure is actually where the stress that prevents his conversational ability is coming from. So he's shooting himself in the foot with his own goals. One of the ways that I helped counter that for myself when I realized that this was happening is that I took all the pressure off actually having to do well. And my goal was simply to show up and stay there for as long as I could handle, with no pressure to actually do anything. Now, if I felt like doing something, I could, but I didn't have to. Ironically, when I didn't have to anymore, I was more likely to. Because now it's just a free choice. I'm just here and I can do more if I want to, but I don't have to stay. If I'm like, okay, I have to talk to 5 people and it has to go well, I'm not going to talk to anyone. I'm going to end up panicking and running home, and then I'm going to confirm that it's dangerous.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The approach that I found most effective in directly addressing my anxiety was simply to pull back a bit on what I was trying to do. All that anxiety is being generated in my head, which means that if I'm setting the bar too high, I've never done pole vaulting, okay? But I imagine the higher that bar is, the more anxious I'm going to feel just thinking about it. That is a high bar. How the heck am I going to get over that bar, right? Lower that bar enough, and I'm like, oh, I can do that. That feels all right. I don't think I'm going to die. I'll probably hit it, and I'll probably fall on my face on the mat, but I'm not going to get hurt. And your goal is to find a place where that bar feels safe enough, and then gradually raise it from there as your confidence naturally develops. So the way I approached it was I'd go out to practice social skills and challenge myself. And if I felt too anxious today, I'd pull back a little bit. hey, I really want to talk to that girl across the cafe. She seems really nice and it looks like she's reading something interesting. I feel way, way too anxious to do that. All right, who can I talk to that I feel less anxious about? This guy next to me, he seems nice. Those baristas, oh, I've met her before. That seems fine. I can walk down the street and make eye contact with people. There's all sorts of other things I can do that feel way safer. And what I find is that when I pull back a little bit on what I'm demanding of myself and show my brain that it is safe and that I'm not in some kind of imminent mortal threat, I can see that confidence grow very quickly. Literally 5 to 10 minutes later, I'll feel no anxiety going up and saying hi to that girl. But as long as I'm pushing myself there, as long as I'm holding on to this kind of win-loss, very, very high bar mentality, like I've got to clear that pole vault jump on the first try, even though I'm totally inexperienced and anxious about this, you're creating an enormously stressful and difficult situation for yourself for no reason. And it becomes really the least fun thing you can think of doing. If you want to develop something in your life, to embrace it, you actually have to create it in a way that you're going to grow with it.
Yeah, I think I can't really say much more than that. It's an actual general goal setting principle. If you're too scared to jump over the bar, lower the bar. It's as simple that you should not go home without having cleared the bar, which means the bar needs to be reduced to a height that you can clear. Now, as high as you can go, but no higher. So that you always finish on a win, even if that win was no better than yesterday. It's amazing the significant difference between 0 and 1. If okay, like today, the best I can do is just look at that girl, smile, and wave. That's all I got in me today. Talking to her is just like Everest. I can't do it. Then at least do that rather than like, I can't do the talking to her, so I can't do anything. Which just creates a sense like there's nothing good that ever happens when I go out. Whereas you get to control what happens when you go out. You set the bar based on your current mood, even if you can't do what you did yesterday or you can't do what your friends are doing or whatever. It doesn't matter. You set that bar and then you move it up from there. And like Mike said, I've had a similar experience. When I take the pressure off myself and reduce the bar, a few attempts at that, I realize, hey, nothing bad's happening. And the fear goes away a little bit and I can raise the bar right there in that same event. Otherwise, maybe I'll do it tomorrow or the day after or whatever.
There's one final comment I'd like to add to this, which dovetails in beautifully with what you just shared, Dan, is that inner bully. So for me, I had all sorts of different theories on what the bully was, what the not good enough story was, what it's trying to accomplish in my head. And it felt like this piece of my brain that was just sabotaging everything. I now have a different perspective on that, which has just recently begun forming. That inner bully in your head is probably more likely the voice of your own values. It's very harsh because it doesn't want to compromise your sense of values, your sense of integrity, your sense of being courageous, your sense of being able to connect socially. Those are important enough to part of your brain that it's taking a zero tolerance approach to trying to get you out there to develop that skill, to develop a comfort with those situations. And it feels very harsh and very aggressive and very unforgiving. It was actually a very difficult situation for me to deal with, that voice in my head that's saying, you suck at this and you're never going to get better, and very harsh. But that has changed. Now, what changed for me was as I lowered that bar to a level that I could win at and progressively every day went back to the field and kept doing my full vaulting and kept trying to increase the difficulty, I came back with that win day after day after day, a little bit better. Very quickly, I noticed two things. One is I'm becoming enthusiastic about the practice of going out and socializing, which before just left me in a panic just thinking about it. Now it's like, oh, that's exciting. Something's going to happen today. I don't know what. That's fun. That was a huge mindset shift. And I noticed that at the same time that happened, the bully started to pull back in my head and kind of just observe the situation. And then it would applaud good efforts. That's essentially what showed me that this was intending to be a helpful part of my own psychology. It was trying to get me to take those steps. If it had to push me hard, it was going to push me hard. But as long as I lived authentically and pursued doing what was in best alignment with my values, I couldn't lose. I couldn't lose. It didn't matter how slow the progress was. It just mattered that I was making progress. And very quickly, I could look in the mirror and feel really good about myself. What I'd suggest here is that for all of us, there's this, not good enough story problem that exists at some level. For some of us, it's a very loud voice. And if you can make that voice your friend and use it as a guide towards what you should be working on a little bit at a time, day by day, starting with a low bar, raising it a little bit at a time, check in with that voice and see what happens. See if it becomes basically your cheerleader in life. It was a pretty interesting experience for me to watch that transformation happen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's trying to push you, but it will get encouraging once you get on track and once it starts seeing some results. The final thought I have on it is what I call the doctor's lollipop. There's a reason that doctors give you a lollipop when you're a little kid after you've been and got your vaccination shots. It's so that your final memory of going to the doctor is an emotionally uplifting one. You remember the doctor for the lollies more than you remember anything else. There's a recency bias. We remember the last thing that happened more than anything else, especially if it's an emotional high. So if you're doing a difficult challenge, make sure you finish with a lollipop. Make sure it always ends with an emotional reward, which you need to design to suit yourself. Something fun, something that you do at the end of anything difficult so that your final memory of it was a pleasant one. Right now, this guy's final memory of every social event is him running away in humiliation. No wonder he doesn't want to go back. Now, if his final memory is rewarding himself with his favorite bit of sushi for putting himself out there, or even better, something social, like he hands a note to a girl that gives her a compliment and he likes that because it feels good, whatever it is, something he always saves to the end so that his final memory is a lollipop. You do that, and you'll start to change your perspective of socializing, especially when you combine it with what Mike's talking about, lowering the bar so that you're basically always succeeding in your goal while constantly growing.